following recording is of me narrating, or actually just simply reading aloud, my own little writings on various topics, as you will see as you will listen to and hear, if you so choose to stick around and actually hear them. So, here goes, so to speak. If it were not for myths, which act as necessary guides in the establishment and continued stability of a culture's morals, as well as propounding implications for appropriate and responsible behaviour of the individual within his or her society, humanity would never have evolved beyond its original archaic, primitive status. Stories and myths are what have guided human action and helped us develop higher, more advanced cognitive abilities, which have allowed us to master our world in ways which clearly distinguish human beings from the other animals, in that we have evolved the capacity for reason to reflect and in so doing learn from our past, and thus be able to foresee, to project and formulate plans for how we ought to act in the future, having understood our past. These relatively new mental adaptations in regards to the evolutionary timeline of Homo sapiens and abilities we human beings have acquired have brought us to a higher level of consciousness than all other animal species, at least so as we conceive of it. It is due to this fortunate adaptation in our evolution that humanity has been able to assume the levels of power and command it now wields at the very top of the animal hierarchy. If our ancestors never started telling stories and conveying myths to one another, we more than likely would never have reached this level of power and mastery over nature, which has allowed us now to live relatively comfortably and securely in modern times, at least in the first world. A myth is a shared cultural story which provides us with both individual and collective meaning so as to how we may act in harmonious accordance with one another and consolidate a mutual arrangement surrounding the rules, the morals, laws, ethical codes that we all agree we must conform and act in accordance with, so as to how we may best, as a species, interact and coexist in a way that maintains alignment with a future trajectory of where it is that we intend to end up, collectively. This is the future utopian paradise, or heavenly realm, which provides us with a shared cultural purpose and allows us to act in peaceful, cooperative concordance in society. This further consolidates our shared views and helps us live in agreement with the rules which have been derived as a result of generations upon generations of myths and cultural stories being instilled and handed down the evolutionary chain of humanity. That's the first one. As you can tell, there's a bit of the theme of myth and the importance of story was that first one, and how it shapes the collective psyche and the individual human psyche as generations go by, whereby certain particular myths or stories are told generationally down many, many lines of human family chains and societal and cultural chains, I guess. This next one sort of continues on, it's like a different, on the same, similar theme, but you'll see. So here it is. The fear of the unknown, aka the fear of death, is the sole cause for why the majority of human beings have always had to soothe themselves by subscribing to conforming to myths, religions, and philosophies which, in their doctrines, provide comfort to the fearful by promising a continuation of life after death, although the evidence may be nil. So great fables and angelic stories must be invented in order to convince the fearful and ignorant masses that this religion is worthy of their faith, which is surprisingly easy to do, it seems, since people's fear and desperate need for protection against the fear of death is too great, or at least has been throughout our human history, for them to bear living with. However, because most people are too quick to subscribe to whatever religion or belief system soothes them most immediately from this innate fear, and cannot summon up the courage required to venture into the unknown and contemplate the mystery of life itself, they often fall prey to manipulation. All the greatest, most dominant and powerful religions and myths, which have largely controlled the actions of human beings throughout history, are predicated on moral and ethical codes which must be strictly adhered to by their followers. To those who adhere and conform and live in obedience to the ethical rules of the myth they have chosen as their protection against the fear of death, the religion always promises rewards in the afterlife, hence their great appeal to those living in fear. However, if a person who has devoted themselves to one of these religious systems breaks the rules and acts in a way not permitted in the moral law of that particular religion, hell or some type of punishment in the afterlife is promised to ensure people stay in conformity to the moral code prescribed. Therefore, since the majority of people have conformed to religious systems or believed in myths throughout the ages, mostly either to quell their fear of death or as a way of comforting themselves via the hope which they convince themselves their faith assures for some kind of salvation at the end of this mortal human life, despite often seemingly highly irrational and too easily refutable for something better to come after this life, despite being highly irrational and too easily refutable, since most people's lives throughout history were full of suffering. How easy would it be for an intelligent, power-hungry group of people to formulate a religious doctrine which promised its devotees, the certainty of salvation from their often pain-filled lives, characterized by suffering and hardship, and not only to formulate such a doctrine, but further yet, to brainwash them into being totally conditioned, or at least willing to surrender to and adopt as their personal value system or moral code, due to its promise to quell their fears, including the greatest fear of all for most, death, by having them live in a way that would keep the formulators in power by controlling these people's actions according to what is deemed right and wrong in its ethical instructions. If the people who adopted this doctrine were to feel as though adhering to it would bring them certain salvation and a reward for a life of toil and thus meaningful suffering by obeying its commands, and thus, of course, quelling or greatly soothing their fear of death, the powerful instantiators of such a belief system, supposing it was an artificially constructed one, written up by those seeking to maintain power and control over citizens of a certain civilization, could thereby deem practically anything they desired as being right or wrong, so as to the ethical or moral actions required, or what they'd like for its followers to consider to consider as being so as to being right or wrong ethically or morally, and thus what is prescribed within its rules and commands of the whole cultural, moral value system, religion, which has throughout human history, when we look at it, for the vast majority of, at least since language, since we've had the ability to communicate to one another and therefore convey meaning through what are sounds. Sounds are, letters are symbols which convey a meaning, and then you put those letters together in a certain different patterns and shapes. You have words. Words are simply letters construed together, which then, when spoken or written, convey a certain meaning based upon the encoding of certain words in certain ways. And so since we've had the ability to convey meaning and therefore language has been around in human history, we, for the vast majority of that time, have en masse, the vast majority of human beings have subscribed and therefore devoted their entire lives to whatever was the most common mass accepted religion or myth or cultural value system of whatever time they were born into. And so how easy does that make it seem? That's just my yes, it might be biased. That's the end of the second piece, thing that I wrote. Yes, I made it a little biased to obviously point out how it could be if a religious power conglomerate of people decided who so perhaps were they already in power and controlled a certain society, perhaps by way of, well, most likely by way of it having the most economic resources and having most of the wealth in the society, how easy it really could be for them to simply brainwash or condition people's minds so as to literally justifying their entire existence. The people in virtually in enslavement to these people whose power will only increase and be instantiated, I guess, and just solidified over time by the very thing that they've simply concocted or created or written up, so as to how they could convince the people with not as much power or money or status as they had at the time of writing it to maintain that power for them and their generations to come, sort of thing. So I don't know, it's just one take on it, but that's that. And then I did want to Alright. How about this one? Oh, it seems... Alright. So this was Thursday, 25th November 2021. I wrote this one. The third one I'll read on here. How a person can possibly ever come to a rational decision in believing religious and political dogma over their own experiences they themselves have known to have had in life absolutely baffles me. How can someone truly declare that they have a sane, reasoning mind and yet still believe there to be more truth in a series of books or writings passed down and thus so easily misconstrued or corrupted over hundreds, if not thousands of years? Understanding that belief, defined, is an acceptance that something exists or is true, especially one without proof. It never ceases to astonish and perplex me that people who have been so lazy in thought so as to accept a certain religious ideology, philosophical stance, or political position as absolute and definitive truth as a belief that they cannot and will not sway or budge from when questioned, not only are so convinced of the truth of their belief, they even view people who remain open and searching in their quest for truth as less than, as below them, and they feel as though their belief gives them a right to talk down to those who are comfortable in knowing that they do not know the truth of the universe, how it began, and what will happen to them after they die. To me, it seems quite clear that these believers, who have inquired little into truth as a whole, who evidently have hardly ever investigated into the nature of truth, allow themselves to become hardened in their beliefs for one of two reasons. First, they fear the unknown so much that they cannot stand the thought of not knowing the answer to questions such as, what happens when I die? What might happen when I die? How did the universe begin? And will my soul live on and be granted entry into a heavenly place where it may rest for eternity after my death? And second, they adopt these unjustified and implausible, to the open-minded person at least, or the skeptic, perspectives on These questions due to, again, their fear of the unknown, but 2, something I've discovered in the case almost always is the case in almost always in these people. Those who have had a certain belief for a long period of time have become so hardened, so conditioned in their way of thinking that to even consider the possibility of it being a false belief would drive them literally to the brink of insanity. Or they would simply be too ashamed to admit that they were wrong, and wrong also not only on the largest scale imaginable for a human being in terms of literally the most the reality of like literally everything that has happened and might happen to us, as well as if these people were to be shown some refutation, something that might refute their belief and even perhaps clearly prove it to be untrue, for them to even allow themselves to consider the possibility of their whole worldview, everything that they thought and had believed and thought they knew to be true, the truth of how things were and would be or whatever, for them to even allow themselves to ponder such a refutation of their entire consideration of reality and how it is, would literally turn their world upside down, because everything would lose meaning. So they would have that's like the dark night of the soul and an ego death combined, to where like literally, especially the older people get, it seems as though they're more and more less and less likely to ever consider a refutation of what they've been conditioned to believe, or condition themselves to believe is the truth, because they couldn't, because their whole life would then have been everything that they conceived of as being meaningful and purposeful in how they acted for their entire life, if that was a lifelong belief, would then be literally could potentially be all for nothing, or have been totally just becomes meaningless in the face of, if they were to then realize, oh shit, this was all bullshit, I've been believing in a complete absolute lie and a fallacy that I've convinced myself or some other religious powerful elite have convinced them of, or political leaders or whatever, who simply are trying to persuade people and manipulate them into, often coerce them into to live their lives and value certain things. Often, especially, we can see it so easily in the modern economic state of the world, the global economy, and how we're all feeding the global economy, and any purchase, any transaction, of a financial kind, we're all feeding and literally enhancing and contributing to this global economy. And a global economy, and if anyone who knows anything about economics at all, always you see that any economic society ever has always, the practically all of the money ends up in the hands of a tiny percentage of people, and then the rest, most of the rest would be basically poor, impoverished. Like, it's simply the gap between rich and poor, and the disparity of wealth just increases, and just inevitably keeps going on, increasing more and more over time in any economic society. And that's our world right now. All of the systems, all of the different industries, everything contributing to the fluctuations of what money can buy in the world is literally contributing to that increasing disparity of wealth. They do. Some people say absolute. There's the term absolute power corrupts absolutely, and it seems if we look at history again, fairly true. I mean, the more extreme sort of opposing ways that people can look at doing things in the extremes is where we tend to see, like, I guess the best and the worst. But like, that's where we can really learn a lot about our nature as human beings. The richest of the rich, they often are corrupt or become corrupted because of their freedom and sense of power and ability to wield that over, the rest of whoever the humans are that might be beneath them in terms of status wherever they are in whatever society they've lived in. That they then have real potential to either destroy or to, they have so much power and freedom to do what they want, really, with that level of money, that amount of status. Anyway, so that was a bit of a rant after the first paragraph of what this seems to be something it keeps going. So basically, going back to how hard it seems to be for especially elderly people, but people who've held a belief or a certain view on how things are for a long time, to be even able to consider what might refute or denounce their philosophy. This really is the level of deceit and fallacy we are dealing with when discussing this matter. If I can summarize what I am conveying to you here in any more clarity, I shall end with this. If you have allowed yourself to believe something is the complete and utter truth, and there is no way it can be any other way except the way you are certain your belief proves it to be, can you also admit that there are 7.9 billion other people on this planet who all have individual and unique experiences in each and every moment they're alive? For to admit to that question as being true is to completely contradict your belief that there must only be one outcome, or one way, and one way only, in the questions to what happens after we die, how the universe began, etc. I mean, perhaps not something such as how the universe began. I don't mean the objectivity of the beginning of the universe. What I mean by saying that is sort of the potential for there being 7.9 billion, since there's 7.9 billion humans, when I wrote this at least, there was apparently, different views, different ways of conceiving or perspectives that may be taken upon truth, thereby 7.9 billion different experiences, unique experiences, and thereby conceptions, ways of perceiving simply the universe itself from different aspects and modes and locales within the universe and time and space. And to acknowledge that there are 7.9 billion of us human beings here on Earth, all having unique and individual experiences in any given moment, yet not to be open to the possibility of there being 7.9 billion unique and individual ways of perceiving reality, and therefore truth. At least subjectively, and for certain instances, different objectives, things that we would normally at least be willing to, and have throughout history easily been led to consider as being objective truths of certain concepts or cultures or places or virtues, things like this. Well, any believer must therefore concede their position as being a hypocrite, because you're literally, to believe one thing is to, and to admit to that is to show that you're willing to hold two totally paradoxical, contradictory views, if that's genuinely your belief or your that's a way of a prejudice you seem to hold of how things are, then that's literally that contradicts itself. If you're a person who believes there is one way, say the way of the Hindu, the way of the Christian, the way of the political, ideologue, or the far left extremist, the Zionist, all these different, ideologies, philosophies, systems which supposedly promise an entirety of truth for how things are, or how best to go about living one's life. What things to value, and how to direct your entire actions, decisions, thoughts, and your existence, how it unfolds. They all promise and claim and beg and try to convince you that they are the correct and the most correct, and therefore the truth in certain. Usually, when it's religion, it's the truth, or political. If a political ideology if they were slightly more humble in that claim, they might say that no, we don't not sure if we have the complete truth of how one should best live their life, but we do have the most truthful and clearly the best. They will all say, and it's the best way that you could, and so, but people continue to find, they have to find a cause, they have to find their why in life, and meaning does seem like something that almost, for most people, seems like an inherent, innate, fundamental thing to have to find, so as to why and what it is, why they're living, and therefore what they will do with their lives, and what things, when they understand what they value, that's how they can then, they can, what's the word? I guess plan, construe, and map out a purpose, so as to what they're going to follow, and literally the things that they will be most prominent in how they direct and live out the thoughts and the actions of their life. It all comes down to what people value and what people are most wanting and willing and desiring to, and consider to be, most worthy of following and pursuing. And there's one more little paragraph here. So again, I went on a rant at the end of that one. I think this is the last one. So, in case you have not heard anyone say this, it's okay to not know everything, and remain open and receptive to new truths as you experience life. It's okay to doubt whether something you have been told your entire life is true or not. It's also okay to fear the unknown. Why else would humans have created religion and philosophy and science? It is because we seek to know the truth of everything and all that is. We have been seeking for as long as we have existed. And there's nothing ignoble, unnoble, unworthy of us seeking such truth. It's simply curiosity, I guess, minus the spontaneity and sort of, I guess, chaos that can follow from just an innate, natural, undisciplined curiosity and natural inquisitiveness. But But what separates the seeker... Oh, hang on. Yeah, it is because we seek to know the truth of everything and all that is. We have been seeking for as long as we have existed. But what separates the seeker, the one who keeps their mind open and able to see truth in a new light as their experience of life goes on, from the closed-minded believer? The seeker embraces the unknown, sees it as a mystery to ponder, and loves the thrill of being able to investigate and discuss different angles in which truth may point towards. They are even okay with not knowing everything until the very day they die. For if death is something that we are quite sure happens to all of us, is death, and the uncertainty of truth, for that matter, not simply, for if death is something that we are quite sure happens to all of us, is death and the uncertainty of truth, for that matter, not simply just another part of life to be experienced? Perhaps it's our way of what we conceive of and have agreed to as being death, the end. It's just a process. It seems to be just look how many other species and things come into being. They have seemingly a lifetime and the way that they sort of evolve throughout the course of a single one of a species member's life. They tend to come from sort of infant or sort of like infantile, or it starts from something very small. Perhaps a seed is sprouted, sprouted, and then sort of grows, and then flourishes, reaches its peak or its height or its maximum potential, its most thriving essence of how it could have been as a being within that species, and then it tends to wither away, or it tends to get old, degenerate, and then when it degenerates and becomes old, it then is either something else. It's returned, sort of disintegrates back into the earth somehow, or something might replace it by either growing out from it, or something is there's that whole process of rebirth, renewal, and also death and decay is that just seems to be, that's why they say often you might have heard of people saying there is but one constant, and that is change or flux. That's the only constant, only one thing. That's actually seems like a pretty profound realization. It seems like a pretty profound observation when everything that is, and it seems to be, at least around us in this reality, seems to have a way that it can be birthed into being, created, or sort of somehow comes into existence, and then it can also wither away and decay. And what we see of it, in terms of its structure or form, or what it is in terms of the material that forms what it is that it appears to be in structure to us, then can disintegrate and wither away into nothingness, which it seems, if we were to consider these forms as truly solid, objective, sort of unchanging, or as what we do sort of conceive them as, which has probably been helpful for human beings with our way of consciousness, because if we didn't sort of take things, say if we didn't look at a lion as a lion back in the primitive days, say, or a tiger as a tiger, and we maybe saw a tiger as simply a bunch of particles and different materials that sort of often had orange, furry like sort of substance on its outer layer, and we never really got to form the concept of tiger in how, when we looked at a moving form that was coming towards us throughout space, I'm sure we never would have evolved, because we needed to develop like a concept of what is dangerous or fear, what we should fear, or what might potentially endanger us if we were to find ourselves near it or something in our life and our experience. So that's how we probably develop the negativity bias, which our brains seem to have in terms of seeking out danger or what might pose a threat to us in our near vicinity or our near outer experience. Because we're often, we have a distinct bias in terms of the support of, self-preservation for our own selves and our own species, our being, to seek out those things that may pose a threat to our existence, obviously, because otherwise we would never have paid attention to them, and therefore would have been easy prey for any other sort of predator or something that might have been seeking to destroy us or kill us or eat us. So, yeah, I think that's all I'm going to read today because, frankly, I'm quite sick of hearing myself speak and also of reading my own writing, at least for today. So, goodbye.